Hey, this is John Lee Dumas, the founder and host of Entrepreneurs on Fire. And if you're wanting to learn how to embrace change and navigate through disruption as a leader, then listen to the Leadership is Changing podcast with my good friend, Dennis Giannoutzis. He's prepared to ignite.
Welcome to Leadership is Changing. Each week, we and our guests provide information and insights through exploring leading change. This is taking your leadership to another level by finding the balance between executive excellence and personal well-being through stories that inspire real change. It's time to adapt in our fast-moving world when leadership is changing with your host, Dennis Giannoutzis.
So the show is called Leadership is Changing, and of course, there's lots of things happening around the world today. But when I say that terminology, what does that mean for you?
And this is a great question after the last one. The world needs leadership more than ever, but we don't just need leaders, we need great leaders. And by that, I mean, it's not enough anymore to be smart, competent, and capable of organizing and giving instruction to a team. A leader must be open and curious, a great listener, and someone who can show empathy and develop future leaders in this mold. And leaders now must also be committed to their ongoing personal development. They must be okay with making mistakes and owning up to it and get it wrong. Leaders are more visible than ever. And I'm thinking, especially in the movement to create more diverse, equitable, and inclusive cultures within organizations, that commitment has to come from and be modeled from the top. The days of a company's reputation coming solely from their advertising, press releases, and stock price are gone. Employees and former employees are on social media describing their workplace cultures. And there have been companies that have been outed they've been outed for saying one thing publicly and not backing it up within the organization. And the stats of senior leadership and board seats are telling, and people are paying closer attention. So there's almost this required transparency of leadership because people are going to know, how are you doing? How are you doing on these important issues?
Yeah, you're too right. And that transparency is getting louder and louder every single, not year, not week, every day is getting louder.
And then there's a new platform. A year ago, I was never talking about TikTok. Now it's all the rage.
Yeah, no, before I was talking about Kit Kat, but now we're talking about TikTok. One's a chocolate and one's not, but never mind, that's all good. But you're right. And my background is my father is from Greece, and there is a saying in the Greek side of things that a fish rots from the head. And when you're talking about leadership comes from the head of the person, of the organization, things like that, and they have to show that, and the transparency and so forth. I think it's so true. But yeah, it is getting louder and louder all the time.
You've probably seen this as well, Dennis, when you're brought into an organization to help them develop or take on some new initiative or change. You start meeting with people and you're developing them and you're training them and it's all great. But what you hear from the people that you're working with is this isn't going to last long because the people at the top, they're investing the money as a look good, feel good thing, but they're not doing it.
No,
right?
You're
They're
right.
not attending the trainings.
They're not walking the talk.
They're not walking the talk. And how many times have you heard people in workshops or training say, who really needs to be here? My boss.
All the time. Yep, you're right. You hear it all the time. And every time I will go and roll out a program, there might be 4, 5, 700, 1,000 people, whatever, go through it. That always comes up. That's number one. And then the number two bit is that we've got to start with the leaders so then they can live it all the time for sure.
And support their teams, right? If it's a new initiative, the leaders should be learning it first so that as their teams go through it, they can support them and they know what they're going through.
And when it does happen, it's a beautiful thing to see it happen, right?
Yes. When everyone's on board and it's just infiltrated throughout the company and the culture and you see it, yes, then everyone is okay. Our leaders, people feel good when their leaders are walking their talk. They know what to expect of them and they trust them.
Yeah, exactly. And I think what we've noticed is as we're talking to leaders since the COVID side of things, the pandemic and lockdown happening towards the beginning of this year, what we've noticed is that those organizations that just based on what you just said there about the trust and walking the talk. They were the organizations, the teams that were able to adapt quicker.
Yes.
Those who didn't adapted, but they found it a lot harder because they didn't have that trust, that foundation side of things, which was really important.
Absolutely. And communication is key. People feel more trust when they feel like they're being informed and
Right.
guided. So that
Yeah.
it does there's so many little ways to build trust, and there's so many little ways to lose trust. But the companies that are enforcing those things, they're communicating, they're walking their talk, they're asking their people, they're getting their input, and they're taking action on it. Or at the very least, explaining to them, we're not doing this right now. Here's why. Let's talk about this or reshape it. When they have those open conversations with their people and their people know what's going on, there's trust.
Yeah. Let's go back to something you said before, which is around the transparency side of things and the empathy, the open side of things. I think it's really important. So there's a couple of things I actually want to go back to. One is around personal development. So we'll go back to that. But the second one is around the transparency. Let's go to the personal development. How important is it for a leader or a person? Forget it whether they're a leader, an individual. What is it important for them to be doing this personal development, and what should they be doing?
Oh, so good. Personal development required, right? Because you have to have self-awareness, right? You need to know where you need to develop yourself. And there's so many ways you can do this. It's almost like you can pick your interests and follow them, right? Or think about what's coming up in conversations. What do my people need from me? What skills do I need to develop? And you can do this through books, documentaries, there's online programs, there's trainings you can sign up for, there's coaching, but it's not even so much important other than having I think required is self-awareness in terms of, you know what your strengths are, you know what your weaknesses are, and you know the impact you have on other people. That is minimum. And anything you can do to develop that awareness and those skills, fantastic. When you branch out from there, it really could be almost anything because it depends on what your interests are, what sector you're in, you know, what type of business you have, the business model, how big is your team. But if you're following your interests and you're paying attention to what you're being asked, you'll know what to seek out and how to develop. It's almost like a natural next step. Every new learning leads you to the next thing. And there's so many resources out there.
Oh, that's great. Yeah, great. And I think the other thing too is a lot of people go into large organizations or any kind of business, and they're expecting their business, their company to develop them. They go, okay, so what's the company going to do for me? I've never had that attitude. I've always had the attitude of, I've got to look after myself and be the best myself. And so I would actually go and invest money on myself rather than waiting for, if the company did it, great. But I never waited for that. Have you been like that, or what have you done?
Yeah, it's been a mix of both. There's even been some trainings that the company had suggested where I thought, ooh, that is not where I want to be going. That's not what and that actually came around as I was discovering coaching. I had a leader in my organization who said, I'd like you to get certified as a black belt, which is like a process improvement training. And I was like, ooh, process improvement is not really where I want to focus, because by that point, as you're well aware, I was more interested in developing people, honing leaders, mentoring. How do we get training for leaders? How do we give them experiences as leaders so they can test it out and see what it's? I was at that point more interested in developing a program where we could give people a taste of what it's like to be a people leader before they become a people leader, because you brushed on this earlier. Sometimes people are chosen just because they're really good at the task or the area. They have a lot of knowledge in the area, and it's, oh, the position's open. You're the most senior person here. You've been doing this the longest, or you're the strongest person on this team. You be the team lead. And then some of them will do well, and some people get in that position and they don't know how to lead people.
Sure.
They know how to do the work really well. And so I was more interested in, how do we give people a taste of that so they know whether or not this is something that interests them? And perhaps if they're not a people leader, we can find them another path of leadership that they can feel good about, because especially in the US culture, if you're not getting promoted, then you feel like a failure, or you feel like there aren't opportunities to get raises. So we're promoting people at the expense of all the other people who will then report to
Mm,
that. So I'm going off on a tangent here, but that's just an example of how there's so many different things you can hone yourself and get and gain skills on. And yes, to answer your question, I was reading personal development books, and it did show in the
yeah,
workplace that it's part of what had me stand out. And I think my psychology background and my interests in how people work was a huge reason as to why I got those 5 promotions when I got them, because
nice.
I'd already had a basis in psychology and human development. And I just kept adding to what I knew. And then as I was experiencing things at work, I would look up articles and maybe some trainings on how do you deal with this situation and what does this
Nice.
happen. So it's really, to sum it all up, follow your interests.
Very good. Yeah. And when you and I are young people, we're young. And the thing here is that even going back 20 years ago, we'd read the books and so forth. If I go back 30 years ago, it was the cassette tapes, the books and things like that. But books has always been there. Nowadays, a lot of people say to me, oh, I'm too busy. I'm a leader. I'm like, oh, really? I'm a manager. I'm just too busy for that stuff. I'm like, what? And so today there is, going back to about the articles and so forth, you've got those available, but now you've got things like executive book summaries. They take 300 pages, they summarize it in 8 pages, easy. You've got the Audible side of things. You've got audios, you've got audiobooks,
My
you've got,
savior. Yep.
yep,
Audible.
podcasts and things like that. So that's great. And now you've also got things like YouTube, and you can go on there and you can search the topics like you were just saying before, and you can go and watch somebody on a video, give you some information about it, show you how to do it, which is quite interesting to see. I want to go on.
Oh, I was going to say, yes, it makes no sense for somebody to say, I'm too busy to get better at what I'm
Oh, yeah.
doing.
Yeah, very easy to say, isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah.
Hey, I want to go to the second area that I wanted to ask you, because that one was around the personal development. The second one was around transparency. We're finding that, as you said before, that leaders are expected to be more transparent nowadays. Why aren't they transparent? What's holding them back? Any ideas?
Yeah, definitely. There is this perception that a leader is somebody who has it all together,
Right.
right? They're always doing the right thing. They know the way, show the way, go the way, right? And if they're making mistakes or they don't know, then they feel like, oh, I shouldn't be a leader. But that's not true. That's an old myth about leaders, was that leaders had to just do everything perfectly. They had to be the person who knew the most in the room. And that is not true at all. As a leader, you don't have to be the most knowledgeable person in the room. You have to be able to create that space that would allow the most knowledgeable person in the room to feel comfortable to bring their thoughts forward, or to encourage other people to bring their perspectives
Right.
forward and how to gain information. And I have had clients who have said, when it came up that they needed help, right? They were drowning in the amount of work they needed to do and deliverables and all of that. And I was like, who can you ask for help? Or can you have a conversation with your boss and set priorities and find out what needs to get done so you can reorganize this? Because yes, this is more than is humanly possible for any one person to do. And the response, I'll never forget this one response, but I've heard it on several occasions. I can't do that, because if I do that, I'll be saying, I'm not competent. I am not capable. You chose the wrong person for this job.
Right.
So instead of being transparent and getting a little vulnerable and saying, I need help, they were more willing to sacrifice their health, their families, their personal life, to work these extremely long hours so they could keep up appearances that they had it all together.
Yep. I'm glad I asked you that question, because I think you're right. That's exactly where a lot of people are at, and they don't want to be transparent because it's almost like they have a mask that they're hiding behind. That mask. I'm not talking about a pandemic mask. I'm talking about this mask called leadership at times, and some people hide behind it, and it's really quite sad to see it happen.
Yes,
Yeah,
when it doesn't need to. Like you, what we've shared, like you can come forward and people will respect that. I'll,
it's
I'll
a
share
strength.
I'll share this really quick, Dennis, because I was that person at times
Right.
in my job. And when I was getting close to the next promotion, I would have people say, I want your job, but I don't want to do what you were doing,
Yeah.
because they saw it. They
Yeah.
saw the long hours. And I was like, I don't expect that you do what I do. Part of me is like, at that point in my life, I was a workaholic and I derived extreme pleasure and also some ego boost as well
Right.
to really over delivering all of the time. And I would just say, I don't expect you to do what I did. I expect you to deliver and know when that means you need to work a little bit extra and when you can back off a little bit. But it let me know that as a leader, I was scaring people
Yeah.
away from ever wanting to be to my successor. Yeah.
Yeah, no, it's scary for a lot of people, but yeah, you're right. That's good. So thanks for sharing and being vulnerable with us there. So it's cool. Hey, so in the world, we're seeing a lot of change happening, and this show is called Leadership is Changing. When I say that comment or that statement, leadership is changing, what does that mean for you?
Okay, every time you say this on the show, I think of a different answer. But for me, I just think everything's drastically changed. And I think just the way, and I think a lot of it is the Gary Vaynerchuk's of the world. We're changing our perspective from seeing, oh, the boss is coming this Friday to check out your performance, to the boss is with you every day, like in the trenches with you, leading the charge. And so while there definitely are those bosses that everybody dislikes who come in on one day out of the week from the golf course and make sure that you're doing what you're supposed to do, I think that the leadership format that we're seeing people succeed in and people wanting to follow, the leaders who are making impact like Elon Musk or Gary Vaynerchuk, or even fill in the blank, even like people like Bill Gates or people who've really had big impacts. It's people who are down on the ground moving the vision along themselves. They're visionaries who are being followed, as opposed to someone who was promoted to a position from the bottom up, or they got the job because they knew somebody in that realm and it's just an investment for them. It's the people who are invested with not just finances, but like actual life investment. Like those are the companies that I see really blowing up. And I think that's what people are looking for. Like I've worked for both. I've worked for the people who say, hey, thanks for everybody for hitting your bonuses this month. I got a special corporate gift and I'm going to go on a cruise for a week. Thank you all for your hard work. And then I've worked for people who every little bit of resources that they get, they're dumping into their team to help build them up. And I'd always rather work for the latter than the former.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's actually really interesting to see that and how people react to it, because I think you're right. When people are promoted into a title, it's a title.
Yeah.
But those who actually take people on the journey with them. And I like what you said before about the boss in the trenches with you. It's almost like when you say life investment, it's almost like they've got skin in the game. They're there with you. They're in there.
Yeah.
They're going to fight with you. They just don't say, oh, there you are. Way you go. Good luck. Bye. And see you in 12 months' time. It's a little bit different. Yeah. Hey,
Yeah. Oh, sorry. Go on.
No.
I was just going to say, yeah, it's disappointing when you feel like the only time you see your leader is when you're doing something wrong. When it's go see the boss. I partner with Travis Chappell and his show, and it's exciting to go see him because we're going to work on something that's going to build what we're working on. It's not, hey, come over. And then I'm instantly thinking, what did I mess up? Like that's a totally different context to be thinking in.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. And I think you then have more confidence as well, which means you will bring more to the table and you will bring more to your game because there's a totally different confidence.
Exactly.
Hey, the show's called Leadership is Changing. Now, when I say that terminology or the title of the show, what does that mean for you?
Yeah, so I thought about this when I saw the name of the podcast, and it's really, there's so much to unpack there, especially in the midst of the first time when the entire world is going through a stressful event together, right, with the pandemic and everyone having to be either remote, or not everyone, but a lot of people having to move to these remote workforces where you've got global teams all over the world on their computers. I think there's been it's back to that trust element. It's how do you begin as a leader to change the way you're leading your team when they're not there with you, right? And so you can't grab them in the coffee room and you can't just walk up to them and talk to them about some feedback. You've got to set meetings or spend time or have phone calls. And so it's back to that trust element that you have to build relationships. And a lot of that is scheduling the one-on-ones and being on video calls. I was on a call the other day and I didn't feel like being on video because I hadn't brushed my hair. And it's just a matter of sometimes you just have to do those things because seeing someone's face and having that direct connection can be really helpful. And there's also the piece that we mentioned earlier about just the workforce changing and becoming more diverse. And after the recent events and the murder of George Floyd and social justice reform, there's this need to back to understanding your team members and realizing that there's other things that impact them. And so having to, as a leader, recognize that as me, my leader, as an African American female, my leader had to recognize this year was extra hard for me. I'm going through a lot more than just the pandemic, but also witnessing a lot on the news that really impacted me as an African American. And so recognizing when your team is going through something, I have an amazing leader who reached out and was just like, hey, how are you? Checking out you. How are you feeling? And there is an element of being personal that I think the traditional workforce has shied away from that. And I think there's going to have to be, especially as we become remote and we deal with more social injustice, there's going to have to be an element of leadership that is personal. As kids enter Zoom meetings and things, that personalization is going to become more important.
Yeah, and I think the key here too would be to check in on people, as you say, but not just once. Do it regularly, because the thing is, if you're doing it once, that sort of feels like a check in the box. I've done that. Yeah, that's all good. But if you do it on a regular basis, I think that's really important too. And the other thing I think that the pandemic is teaching us, and other events as well in the world, all sorts of events are happening for all sorts of countries, is that it's actually making us do a bit of a reality check, that we do need to see how people are, how they're coping, where they're at with things. I don't know about you, but I'm seeing a lot of leaders who are actually emotionally tired. That's been a big year for them. And I'm like, oh, so is Christmas canceled this year because of the pandemic? We're not going to do that this year. What are we going to do? I think because in this part of the world, it's summertime. We're going to summer now. This is when we take our summer breaks. And I think people are wanting to take a break because they need time out. But I think we do, as you said, we do need to check in on people from all of our different backgrounds, right? Cultures, all sorts of things. I was interviewing somebody on the show the other day, and it's more about diversity again, but it's people with a disability, and they're not being looked after well either. And so it's because we talk about diversity and inclusion, we talk about all these things. For a lot of organizations, it is a tick in the box, right? But they talk about a lot of things, but they tend to forget about disability.
It's a really good point. I was talking to a coworker the other day, and we're doing some research at Dell about being the only on a team. And from a disability standpoint, prior to the pandemic, he was discussing how when they would go on offsite and travel, I was the only one that had to think about what will be my accommodations when I get there. Are we traveling on plane, in the car? How will I get my wheelchair in? There were so many things that no one else had to think about, but because of him having the different ability, he had to think through those things and no one else thought about them. And so there's this thing about being the only person on a team. I was talking to someone else in India. She's the only female on a team. And she had to go, they were having this all before the pandemic. They had to go to this beach. They were having like a beach party and for all the offsite. And she was like, being the only female, I had to think about, what do I wear? Everyone else was just like, okay, let's go. And she's like, I don't know, what do I wear? Do I wear a bathing suit? Is that inappropriate? Do I wear something else? And so thinking through all these things, again, I think as leaders, sometimes we forget those small nuances that we don't have to think about that other people may have to.
That is huge. That is huge. So listeners, what Stephanie's sharing here with us is the fact that at times, in fact, all the times, I think I have to say here, Stephanie, that we do need to think about not just ourselves, we have to think about the people around us, the people in our teams, and what does it mean for them? However, there's also a balance too. I don't think that we can try and stop living, or we don't try and stop doing things because we're worried about other people. We have to do what we need to do, but take into consideration others. I think that's probably a key word to use, is being very considered when you're looking at things, for sure. Hey, so the show is called Leadership is Changing. And when I say that statement, that name, leadership is changing, what does it mean to you?
Adapting and recognizing the change in the world, in the business, in your company, recognizing the employee base, but recognizing more importantly that for businesses to continue to survive, you've got to lead from the front and change direction if required and when it's required, and be nimble.
So to continue to survive, you need to lead from the front.
Absolutely. Leadership these days is much more at the front leading as opposed to managing. I think there's a distinction from we used to have great managers and used to talk about great managers. The language has changed. We're looking for great leaders and people who can actually make a real difference and be very inclusive and humble, but have gravitas at the same time.
Yeah,
Gravitas is
fantastic.
really important.
Fantastic. Yeah, gravitas. I like that. I like that word. I like that, how you put it as well. For sure, humble and so forth, but with gravitas. They're fantastic.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Leadership is Changing with your host, Dennis Giannoutsas. Each week, we and our guests provide information and insights through exploring leading change, inspiring executives and leaders to adapt and lead a bigger game in a fast-moving world.